Rooming houses might sound today like something out of Victorian England, but not that long ago they were actually a very common form of housing here. With us now for a quick history lesson from the beach in Ontario's capital city, Philippa Campsie. She's a principal with Hammersmith Communications and an adjunct professor in geography and planning at the University of Toronto. And Philippa, it's great to have you on TVO tonight. How are you doing?
Very well, thank you.
Excellent. What makes something a rooming house?
A rooming house involves some shared facilities. People who live in a rooming house, they rent a room and they share a kitchen or a bathroom or both. They also pay their rent directly to a landlord, so it's different from a group of people sharing a house and pooling their resources to pay for the rent.
And typically, how many people might live in one?
Rooming houses can have as few as 4 people. But there are some very large rooming houses that may have 20 people, 60 people, more.
And again, typically, who lives there?
Well, if you'd asked me that 20 years ago, I would have said that most of the people living in rooming houses were very low-income people, and they might or might not be employed. Today, rooming houses house all kinds of people. They house a lot of students, and in fact, years ago when I was a student, I lived in a rooming house. They house immigrants. They can house families with children. Anybody who cannot afford to rent a self-contained unit, a rooming house is the cheapest option available.
And let's just take the city we're in right now, for example. When did they first become a thing in Toronto?
They became a thing, I think, after the Second World War. Before the war, it was very common for people to take in lodgers as a way of helping to pay their own expenses. After the war, that became less and less the norm, but there were still a few people who could not afford their own accommodations. And so rooming houses, old houses were bought up and turned into single room occupancy rooming houses. There was a lot of old housing in the city core that at the time was not considered particularly valuable. It is now, but at the time it was considered of no interest. People wanted new housing. So these old houses were available quite inexpensively, and they could be divided up to create rooming houses.
Yeah, that seems to be the experience here in the city, in as much as if you go to Parkdale, for example, it's a lot of these sort of older, I guess what in the day would have been more stately mansions that have somehow been converted over to rooming houses. Any sense about why it turned out that way?
Well, I think the growth of the suburbs in the 1950s, people could go and buy a brand new house. These old houses, they're difficult to keep up. They're expensive, they're drafty, they have old wiring and things like that. And it was much more attractive for young families to move out to new housing. So these old sort of elephants were left, and the only people who were willing to take them were people like rooming house owners.
If there's one thing about them, Philippa, that I think is fair to say, it's that controversy seems to follow them wherever they go. Why is that? People don't want to live in the same neighborhood as rooming houses. Sometimes they fear a number of things about rooming houses. In the old days, they used to fear that the kinds of people who lived in rooming houses were not the kind of people they wanted as neighbors. Nowadays, some of the fears are a little different. Now that there are suburban rooming houses, people fear in the suburbs problems with parking, too many cars attached to one property, problems with property maintenance if nobody's living on site who's going to look after the place. If it's students, often problems with noise. So whatever it's not really the houses they fear, it's the kind of people who live in the houses. People have a lot of prejudices and preconceived notions about the kind of people who live in rooming houses.
Well, you say prejudices or preconceived notions. It's not a crazy thing to think that if there's 25 students living in a rooming house, it's going to be noisy at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning. Now, is that a prejudice or is that a response to a reasonable concern?
Actually, the greater problem is with the kinds of houses that students rent as a unit. A group of friends renting a house together is more likely to have a party on a Saturday night that's noisy or even gets out of hand than a number of people individually renting rooms who don't know each other and may not all be students, and you have a mix of tenants. That's actually going to be less noisy.
Mm-hmm. Now, you mentioned that this practice goes back decades and decades. Have these concerns about, as you put it, the type of person that lives in a rooming house, have those concerns always been there?
Yes, I think so. I think people who are homeowners are often rather prejudiced against people who are renters, particularly if they have very low incomes. I think that's long been the case.
I'm told there are about 350 licensed rooming houses, all in what we used to call the old city of Toronto. So basically not the inner suburbs, not Etobicoke, Scarborough, North York. Any idea how many unlicensed rooming houses there are in the new amalgamated, it's not so new anymore, 20 years old, in the 416?
How long is a piece of string? I don't know. Nobody can tell. These things are invisible, and the landlords take care to keep them that way. They don't want people knowing that they're operating outside of zoning regulations and operating unlicensed rooming houses. So there are unlicensed rooming houses in the city of Toronto, as well as throughout the former cities of Etobicoke and North York and East York and Scarborough. And York allows them.
And do I assume the city doesn't clamp down on this practice because at the end of the day, lower income people need places to live, and if you start shutting these places down, they won't?
Yes. Now, it's not always the case that the city doesn't clamp down. If there are persistent complaints from the neighbors, the city will investigate. And sometimes it is forced to apply the rules. I think it's reluctant to do so because it does not want to destroy affordable housing, but sometimes it's in a position where it's forced to close the house down.
Why do there seem to be so many fewer rooming houses today than, say, 20 or 30 years ago?
Well, licensing itself can cause the loss of rooming houses. When a city brings in licensing, one of three things happen. The responsible owners will meet the requirements, upgrade the house if necessary, get the license, and stay in business. Some people will look at the cost of upgrading the house to meet the requirements and say, I just can't do that, and they'll go out of business. Perhaps they've been in the business for a long time, they're close to retirement, and they think it's just not worth it to make all of those changes and spend all of that money. And they go out of business. And then, of course, there are some less responsible and less conscientious owners who simply keep operating but don't bother to get a license. And they continue invisibly, they don't disappear, but the city cannot include them in its numbers.
Now, most people, when they say they don't want a rooming house in their neighborhood, they don't come out and say, because I don't want those kind of people living near me. They say things like, well, it's inconsistent with the streetscape, or it's not consistent with the values of our stable neighborhood. So my question for you is, how much of that is on the level and how much of it is code for something more nefarious?
That's a difficult question. There can be disturbances, as you mentioned, with students. There may be noise. It's in the suburbs. It's more likely that there will be extra cars, though not a lot of rooming house tenants have cars. Some do, and to get around in the suburbs, sometimes you need a car. So there may be there are some legitimate problems that need to be addressed. But I think, yes, a lot of the things that people complain about, quite often people believe that it will affect their property values to have rooming houses on their street. Various studies have shown that that's not really the case. The fact is that these things are invisible. It doesn't affect the streetscape unless you have too many cars. It doesn't really affect anything. There are rooming houses in the beaches, and I don't notice them. So yes, and the owner of a rooming house, the sensible owners know, because they are operating outside of the licensing regime, they know to keep their property clean. They know to make sure that the garbage is picked up and that the house is kept in good repair so it doesn't attract attention.
Well, Philippa, we thank you for coming on to TVO tonight and telling us more about them. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.